Hi, welcome to the Chess Wolf intermediate page. This game is going to demonstrate um, winning material. It's going to show you about winning material, and the reason I put this up. This game is not. It's got a lot of mistakes in it. Okay, but at an amateur level, like the level that we're at, these kind of mistakes happen in games. So if you're good at keeping track of material, you can win games by just taking pieces. So let's just start and I'll show you what I mean. So we're developing toward the center. And this is kind of a strange arrangement here. Normally I would see other moves here, but this leads to an interesting game. So we're just still developing. Somebody's trying to get the upper hand here. Now white's threatening to take this, has got two pieces focused on this f7 pawn, and the only thing defending that pawn is the king. So white's threatening to take that pawn basically here, and there are a couple of different ways that white can do that. So black should defend that pawn, but black instead comes out and does the same threat against white. Threatens to take the white pawn. Now it would have been interesting for white to experiment here and to just go ahead and take this pawn, say with the bishop, take this pawn with the check and see what happens, or take it with the knight, but it would get kind of complicated, and this was a fast moving game, so white didn't want to try and calculate all that. So white just wants to play it safe. So white castles. So now white's rook is protecting this this pawn, and white is again threatening this, right? Because black can't do it back. So black decides to go ahead and castle, and again black didn't want to start exchanging pieces, so black just wants to get to safety. So white brings out the queen to f3, and this is a simple threat. White's simply threatening to capture black's knight with the queen, because that black knight's not protected yet. So black should either move that knight or protect it. So black plays knight to, but black plays knight to c6. So instead of protecting the knight on e4, black plays knight to c6. Now sometimes it may look like you got an easy win, like the white queen should be able to easily take that knight, right? Well, you have to look at it and ask yourself, what's black going to do if I take that knight with my queen? Is there anything is black trying to play a trick on me? Okay, so in this case white is confident that black can't really get this back, so white takes the knight. Black plays pawn to d5, which would have been a good plan if that pawn was protected by maybe another pawn, but it's not, and I think black overlooked that, because black's now got a double attack going here. So thinking fast, maybe thought he could get the knight back with this double attack. Only problem is that this pawn right here is not protected, so white just takes it. So now here's something to remember when you get down material. So right now, think about it, ask yourself, white just won a knight, right? So white is ahead by a knight. White's actually ahead by a knight and a pawn. If you look, white's got 7 pawns, black only has 6. And you can rewind the video. One of the reasons that I wanted to show you this video was so that you could get practice at calculating. And if you have all day to think, fine, but sometimes you don't have a long time to think. So you want to try and get good at calculating quickly, so anyway, when you get down by material, black is down by a knight. it's not a good idea to keep exchanging, because if you keep exchanging, keep wiping pieces off the board, like if black keeps this going and we trade piece for piece, right? Piece for piece all the way down, who's going to end up with the most material at the end of the game? White, right? Because white's already ahead by a knight and a pawn. So if we just wipe all the pieces, all of the other pieces off the board one by one, trade them all one for one, white's going to end up ahead by a knight and a pawn and at the very end of the game, and white's going to win the game because the black king is not going to be able to stop that white pawn from getting to the back rank and becoming a queen. So it's not a good idea for black to exchange, but black is maybe a little bit panicky here and is hoping that by taking this, sees all these white pieces piled up in the middle of the board and is trying to strip it down a little bit, trying to clear the middle of the board out a little bit, but it's not really helping. It's just making black's situation worse. White just takes the knight. So white is still up a knight and a pawn, right? Now if you've lost track, just watch the rest of this and then you can come back and watch again and kind of go through it slowly, pause the video and add things up as we go. So white's ahead by a knight and a pawn. So black should try to avoid exchanges, but black, guest doesn't know this, right? So black plays bishop to e6. Two things are going on here. White will happily exchange, any material, as long as it's an even exchange, white will take it. As long as it doesn't leave white in a bad position, white will take it, because it just gets white closer to the end game, what we call the end game, and with extra material. So white takes the bishop, black captures back. The other thing that black didn't see here was that when white's bishop took black's bishop, it opened up this square here. The white bishop used to be sitting here, used to be in the way. It's not in the way anymore. So now this black's other bishop is open, is undefended, not protected. So white just takes it. Black plays b6. I'm not sure, what black was thinking here. I'm not sure there are any good moves for black at this point. It's too far down in material. So just threatens the queen. Queen moves back. Now what's the queen threatening? Queen's threatening to take this pawn, right? And the pawn can't move. So here's a little tidbit of information. When you see what we call an isolated pawn, attack it. This pawn is isolated. So you might be asking yourself, well, what do you mean by that? What's an isolated pawn? An isolated pawn is a pawn that is not protected by another pawn. An isolated pawn is a pawn that is not protected by another pawn. So when your opponent, if they have an isolated pawn, this is one is especially weak, what you want to do is two things. You want to try and keep it from moving forward, and you want to attack it. So you want to kind of keep it from moving forward so it can't get out of it can't escape, and then you want to attack it. Well, what's keeping this pawn from moving forward right now? Why can't this pawn just go to e5? You learned this in one of the previous lessons. What's going on right here? What's this called? It's called a pin, right? That pawn's pinned. And what kind of pin is it? It's an absolute pin. Means it's a pin against the king, right? It's illegal for that pawn to move out of the way. So that pawn can't move out of the way. It's stuck and it's being attacked by the queen. So black should defend it. So here's where black makes another mistake. Black doesn't defend the pawn. I'm not sure why black decided to advance this pawn to c5. That's what black did. So white just takes the pawn on e6 and picks up a little extra time because it's check. So now black is stuck. white's kind of controlling black's movements. The black king's got to move out of the way, or black has to block with the rook. Those are really the only two things that black can do. So black moves the king out of the way. White, now again, we talk about fighting for the center, right? The center of the board and the central files on the board. You know, we want to fight for those. So, and with that thinking, white plays rook to e1. So now white wants to take over this e file. White also wants to exchange pieces. And white was kind of thinking at this point maybe black would go for this exchange. And here again is where you got to be able to calculate, right? Black plays rook to e8, maybe thinking, well, a rook is worth less than a queen, so white won't take the rook. Well, the problem is that, you know, if you can calculate, you can see that white can take the rook because white's willing to exchange. This just gives white a chance to wipe pieces off the board. White takes the rook. The black queen takes a white queen. So far it looks okay, but then the white rook can just take back. So after the black rook takes the white rook, it turned out that it was an even, what we call an even exchange. Neither side got extra points for that exchange, but white got to wipe all those pieces off the board. So now all white has to do is keep that black rook from coming down and playing checkmate on the king, right? The black rook would like to do this. It's checkmate, right? He wouldn't move here, he would just come down here and it would be checkmate. So white's not going to allow that. White just moves over to protect that square. And here's where, you know, the king can be useful. The king can't move into danger, but it can take anything that's standing next to it, right? So this black rook can't move to either one of these squares now because the king will just take it. So black makes a move. White starts to pull out some pieces. Black makes another move. Now there's different ways the game could have gone. We won't get into details. White just made this move. Now, we talked about en passant, right? Before. If you've been through the basic series, you'll know about en passant. Black could do this capture right here. And white knows this. And white's happy to let black do that, because if black does this, white's just going to take back, and he's going to end up with a nice little row of pawns here, right? This pawn will be sitting right here, and white's happy with that. Got to exchange off another piece, and still has a nice strong pawn structure. So black doesn't take en passant. Black wants to try and form a wall, but white's decided to just try and go after this wall of pawns here. So offering another exchange. If black doesn't take, then white's going to take. So black captures, and white captures back. Now black should protect that pawn on a6, but for some reason black only moves the rook up to e7, leaving that a6 pawn up for an easy capture. So white just takes it. Now white's threatening a back rank mate. So black comes back to protect against that. White comes over to scoop up the last black pawn. And black, I guess, forgot about the back rank mate, because white can do it from here too. Black plays rook to e7. White plays rook to c8. Check. And the king can't go anywhere, so the only thing that black has left is to block, and that doesn't help because that black rook is not protected. White just takes the rook. That's checkmate and the end of the game. So you know, go through this game until you get the good at calculating. That was the idea of putting this game up, so that you could get some practice and see if you can kind of like go through it, see how quickly you can go through it and keep up with the with the count on the pieces. Being able to do that will help you a lot in games. It'll help you think faster if you can quickly, do calculations in your head when you're thinking about making a move. Thanks very much for watching. I will put up another video just pretty soon. And for those of you who are in my class, I'll see you in class. Bye for now.